our disagreement with one another is not to our detriment. That is not the problem. The problem is white supremacy. The problem is that there are people who are okay with that level of power and control and lack of autonomy. And that is how they grab more power and take more autonomy.
I was doing great. Everything was fine. And then I heard about all the national DV orgs taking all their LGBTQ content off. And it's like, I broke. I know nonprofits are a failed experiment. I know they are. I've been telling everybody they are. But knowing it and then experiencing it and just watching 20 years of your work, 30 years of this work, just like, pop, get erased. It kind of broke me yesterday. I've been like leaving like ranting voice texts to people, and like some people have responded, some people have not responded. I was like, oh, cool. I think people are like, is Shannon okay? We're just gonna let her bake for a second. That's where I'm coming at. I'm like in a special place where I'm just like, everyone who will listen to me about they're failing, they've thrown us under the bus. Kelly Hayes used the phrase organized abandonment, which apparently is a Ruth Wilson Gilmore. She coined it, the organized abandonment from the domestic violence movement. So that's how I'm coming in.
I think I texted you back that they're a bunch of bitches. So as someone who has left the nonprofit industrial complex, who risked funding several times, who lost funding several times, I think they're a bunch of bitches. Yep. And I think that this is why we had such a hard time aligning with mainstream organizations, because they would never make the choice in resistance to what the government was doing, or they would not move towards abolition because they needed that sheriff's, that prosecuting attorney's approval. Yep. And I was told to my face several times, if you don't work with the cops, if you like, then it's not going to work. It did work. Right. And it was so frustrating, continues to be so frustrating when we have examples of how the work can happen. And they're like, well, we have to hold on to this funding. And it's like, you know what? We actually don't.
Yeah. And it's because federal funding is fueling the anti-violence movement. And there was always a day that was going to come home to roost. And that time is now. And it has meant that they can't be brave. And what I noticed is that when Trump threatened tariffs against Canada and Mexico, one of the things that happened is Canada and Mexico were like, bet 25% tariff back. And, you know, it wasn't even 12 hours from that announcement that Trump was like, JK, we're not going to be doing that. It's fine. You know, the federal funding freeze. And they're like, oh, we're not doing that. And then instead of being like, oh, no, we will not, you'll have to shut us all down because we will not comply, which I do think would work. They're just like, oh, great. Absolutely. We're going to comply in advance. You haven't even asked us to remove pronouns from line staff's emails, but we're just going to go ahead and do that in advance. And I'm like, you fucking cowards.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think about if that was so easy to remove, what else is disappearing? Because, you know, the other thing that is real about working in the mainstream movement is internally, we have had to fight to have people hired that will recognize trans people as individual people who deserve protection from domestic sexual violence. If you're not even willing to be brave enough to list your pronouns, then I have a real fear about how programs are disappearing because y'all didn't want to have them in the first place. We've been fighting to ask you to have them in the first place. And now here we are again. Organized abandonment is a beautiful way to say that. Yeah, it's systemic. What's actually sad about it is that it's actually not systemic. They were like, we are fine. We just give up.
We barely wanted to do it before. We were slightly guilted into doing it in the first place. And the first time it will actually benefit us to abandon. They're just like, oh, great. We barely even wanted to do this anyway.
Yeah, it was hard to begin with, and we were feeling all kinds of ways about it. So we're just going to do what's easiest. It's ugly. It is ugly out here.
Yeah. And I've been joking that the liberals have me out here defending pronouns and emails like it's some kind of radical act. It is a tool. It is helpful. And I will tell you, tons of queer and trans people in my life don't do it because they actually don't want, like they want a level of flexibility and they want a level of to be able to pivot how they need to pivot. And so they're not trying to actually put their pronouns in the emails so that they can have like plausible deniability if it makes them safe. And then also like certain other places, what they need, and it might shift and change. And so I'm like, I don't even think that's like a thing we should fight for. Like, that's not the top of my list of things to fight for. And so I can't believe you jerks have me out here defending it. It's not even on my list of priorities.
Oh, you want to talk about a pivot? You want to talk about a pivot?
Yeah.
I am very upset by how this administration has convinced me that I care about law and order.
I know.
I am having a really hard time with how I'm like, that's against the rules. And then I'm like, wait, oh no. And I'm like, and I think that is part of the point. The moment that we're in has me feeling like I want to be very careful about the things that I want to ask people to return to us. And I want to make sure that I am thoughtful enough to remember that these systems weren't necessarily serving the people, just like the domestic and sexual violence agencies. They were not necessarily doing what we needed them to do anyway. As I'm watching these things and feeling like, but those are the rules, it's giving me a moment of pause where I'm like, okay, I do want the things that protect us, protect our rights, protect our expansion of what our understanding is through science and education and all of these things. And also some of these rules kept us chained to systems that we're not serving. So do we have at all in the in-between time an opportunity to really be thoughtful and discerning about what we want to throw a temper tantrum about? I absolutely don't like that I am fighting for things that feel so small, but it's usually because it's connected to something that is so much bigger. And it's the canary in the coal mine. It's like, oh, you're taking the pronouns. That, without any other information, is telling me that you are also moving towards an abandonment of these people.
Right. Exactly. That's very beautifully said. It grounded and not me just being like, I'm like, oh yeah, that, what you just said.
Well, I did call people a bunch of bitches earlier, so please remember that, I can swing, I can go, the pendulum doesn't even swing both ways. It goes in a wide circle.
We contain multitudes. We contain multitudes.
Exactly.
And it's the thing you're saying about like the opportunity of chaos, right? As Octavia Butler has taught us, and God has changed, the things about change. When things fall apart, it all falls away and we don't have to pick it all back up, right? And so I'm trying to remember that in the collapse to get ready. Also, as Miriam Kaba tells us, we have moments. And so sometimes there are moments of planning and of organizing and preparing. And sometimes there are moments of like, oh, now it's go time and we're ready. Now is a time of preparing because we'll have go times, we'll have moments. And to not spend my energy fighting about pronouns and emails because that's not actually top of the list. But there are lots of things I do want to pick back up. And so thinking about chaos and collapse, there's power in that.
This is a great way to move into our conversation today, because I've actually been thinking about how much of our imagination is used towards imagining collapse versus imagining collaboration or creativity. I've been checking myself on this because I'm like, there is a way that conservatives, especially evangelical Christian conservatives, have been meditating on apocalypse based on their doctrine for hundreds of years. And so when they're imagining the future, whether it's a climate disaster or the rapture, they always have an imagination for violence and harm, chaos and disruption. But what we've seen after every crisis is that humans help each other. I was giving myself a sit down and thinking about my imagination in my own community. Don't get me wrong. I am not a lover of neighborhood groups, neighborhood watch groups, neighborhood Facebook groups. None of them. I don't like any of them. I have them silented. I'm only there so I can get the information that I need. Like last week when a transformer blew up down the street and I thought we were all about to die. That was a good time to be in the neighborhood group. But other than that, I don't want to be in the neighborhood group. And I'm like, these are the people who, as annoying as they can be about calling the cops and as terrible as they can be to one another, they have helped each other find their lost dogs, their lost kids. They have shown up to put food in the free food pantry. They go to meetings every week, even if their stupid opinions are stupid, they still show up. And I'm like, it's really interesting to think about how many of us were raised amongst that doctrine because we are a Christian-centric nation. That's what we do. if that is the imagination that they have given us, what does it mean to resist that imagination and to think about the end times are going to be terrible no matter what? Like if we imagine a comet is going to come and hit us or there's a climate disaster, it's going to be terrible. However, when they were just talking about Pompeii, so I just read this article maybe like a month ago that they have done I know. Don't get me started. There's so many things I've learned recently that you don't even need to know about. We're just scratching the surface here, honey. But they did some work on their original theories, which was the bodies that were encased in the ashes. They thought they were all family members. They had written a story, a narrative based on our understanding of what society and culture must have been. And they went back and did some research and some sciencing, and they found out that the body that was wrapped around a small child, they were not related. Mm-hmm. And it's actually possible that one or both of them were enslaved, that they weren't connected at all. And it's like, why would a man wrap his body around a small child during a disaster? We didn't have an imagination for it. We're like, oh, that must have been the parent. That must have been someone who cared for this child. And it's actually completely possible that it was just a person who didn't want a child to experience pain. And we just can't imagine it because our narrative has been about this abandonment. It has been about men not showing up. It has been about patriarchy and all these things. I'm like, no, we actually have an opportunity to imagine care. What if we had a doctrine of like, if the world falls apart, what do? We care for each other. What? That's crazy.
I can't remember if we've talked about it on here or not, but one of my favorite books is A Paradise Built in Hell. Mm-mm. And it is all about this, right? So the author goes through these kind of moments of disaster, moments of collapse, largely maybe entirely in the United States. And she dismantles the theory that people are horrible to each other and that it's the government that saves us. And so she does the San Francisco fire. She does this explosion that happens in Chicago, these moments of like something big and the infrastructure collapses for a short period of time. And what she goes back and sort of makes this point through all of this kind of research and, journals and sightings and things is that what people did was they cared for each other. Overwhelmingly, when things collapsed, people created mechanisms to feed each other. People came around and they took care of each other and they made sure that each other's needs were met. Strangers, and that things actually started to fall apart when the government showed up. So then a week later, when the government shows up, then they start to take the control of like food mechanism or resource mechanism, and it serves people less well. And actually just debunking this idea that people are going to be looting or that you're going to be unsafe, and that actually people care for each other when those collapses happen. And I just thought it was such a beautiful example after example after example about how people actually are caring for each other.
I love that. It's just one of those things where I'm like, who's we? Like, who's in control of that? I suppose we are. So if we have this imagination for it immediately, that's what we're going to do. But if we start thinking immediately that we would resist doing that we would work collectively, and that if we did loot, it would be Walmart.
Add Target to that list now.
Amazon warehouse. You better lock it up tight.
I do live within blocks of an Amazon warehouse, so hit that up.
Listen, I'm just saying, let's be targeted and let's organize care, but let's not be ridiculous.
Exactly.
So anyway, you are listening to.
Sure. Yeah.
You are listening to the Propaganda Podcast with Tajmika Torak and Shannon Perez Darby. Today we are talking about The King of the Apocalypse. And this movie is not manga. Okay, there is that in the world named King of the Apocalypse. I know this because when I was trying to find this movie, it kept coming up. It was kind of hard to find. But what we're watching is a movie about Stuart Rhodes, who is the original founder of the Oath Keepers, a white supremacist militia group, and one of the key leaders in January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C. And this movie really talks to mainly his son. Is it produced by Dakota Adams?
I'm not entirely sure, but he is the key narrator throughout our time, and he has a significant role in bringing it into the world.
Yes. So Dakota Adams, Stuart's child, who does not claim him as father. So just like other interviewees, I'm going to match that energy, and we will just call him Stuart Rhodes. Dakota Adams walks us through the narrative of his family's story from the very beginning, where Tasha Adams Stuart Rhodes' wife meets him, all the way through their marriage, having children, all the way through radicalization and imprisonment. The impact on their family, but also this future-facing look at what do we do now that he has been pardoned and is likely coming home. Not home to them, but is going to be out here with the rest of us.
He's out here with the rest of us now.
Yeah, he's out here. You know what, Shannon? I need you to stop interrupting me. This is my time to share. To share the opening. And I know that I've already asked you 2 questions, but keep your answers to me if I can practice restraint. This is my time.
I'm like, I wonder if that's funny to anyone else on contact. People are like, yeah, Shannon was being so rude.
Wow, it's Tashmika's turn. Yeah, no one listening to the long-winded way that I describe anything on this podcast is like, no one's giving her enough time to speak. Anyways, back to me. Let's focus on what's important.
Continue.
So again, he is out. These folks have been pardoned. And now we are looking at another 4 years of Trump as president. And what does it all mean? I found out about this documentary because my dear friend Shannon texted it to me and was like, do you want to watch this? And I was like, yes. So here we are, literally a week later, ready to record a podcast about it because there is so many really important themes within this movie that are unsettling, are sort of eye-opening in some ways. The one thing that Dakota Adams does really well in this movie that I really appreciated is he's not just telling you the sequential events. He's sort of lifting the lid off of why do we believe these things? What is it about libertarians and guns? What do they think about racism and white supremacy? What do they think about this oath to uphold the Constitution? And so there's all these breaks in the movie where he's like, hold on, let's just stop for a minute. You need to understand why this is so important. I really appreciated that about this film.
Yeah. I found out about this because I heard a story on the radio. I came in like a little bit into the story, into the interview with Dakota Adams. And I was so touched by listening to him talk about his experience of growing up, listening to him talk about Stuart Rhodes and to talk about what it was to grow up with this radicalized man who was violent and abusive in their family. And really, you know, Dakota's pretty young. He's in his 20s. And hearing the work he had done to make sense of that experience, to be grounded. The interviewer is really asking him so many questions about, well, like, what does that feel like? How does it feel to not have a dad? And he's like, you know, I've made sense with that. I've made peace with that. My job is to live the life I want, to like bring light and clarity, you know, shine the light into the shadow of this experience. And like, I'm safe. I'm doing the things I need to do to take care of myself. This person is not my father. I have grieved that. And I understand he's not my father. I'm not actively grieving in front of you. Like it's closed. And it was so clear to me how much work he had done and just that was a person who was present and grounded in that experience. And reminded me so much of so many survivor stories of someone has really done the work and has been so crushed systematically by another person and then has really regained their agency, like fought back their own sense of the world. And I heard that with so much clarity from Dakota and was so touched by it that led us down this road that brought us here.
Dakota is Stuart Rhodes' son. When we spoke in August, he told us about growing up with the Yale-educated, paranoid, abusive conspiracy theorist, Stuart Rhodes.
We were always to get out of the car and stand back to back with him at an ATM or at the gas pump in case of attack. We were in such a bubble that we had to maintain strict secrecy and put on a front even with other people inside the movement. We would be unjustly persecuted in heavy sarcasm by Child Protective Services as a weapon against Stuart if we told anybody that we, for the most part, could not read or that we were suffering from severe medical neglect.
Dakota went on to work in construction, firefighting. He made a quixotic run for state office as a Democrat in Montana. He, his mom, and siblings are now completely estranged from Stuart Rhodes after terrible child custody battles and court testimony. I asked him back in August if that was painful. Dakota, this is your dad. Is there any ember of loss?
Oh, I don't really have much emotion left except for the cold calculation that he could become a threat to my family again.
And Dakota Adams joins us now. Dakota, that was your concern then. Do you think your father is a threat to you now?
Yeah, Stuart, as long as he is free, is an ongoing threat to my family and to the safety of the country.
You do not call him your dad, you call him Stuart. I will as well. And he had served just 1 year of an 18-year sentence. We said in the introduction, there doesn't seem to be any parole now because of this commutation. Is that how you're reading this?
Exactly. The message has been sent that if you commit violence on behalf of the president, Trump will eventually come back and save you from consequences.
Your mom, Tasha Adams, she said in October that Stuart, the husband she divorced, had a kill list, and she believes she's on it. Do you think you are?
It depends on whether being vindictive and getting revenge against us for the custody hearings and for my mother's testimony in his sentencing and bail hearings is worth it, or if he's going to follow the path of least resistance and be a pro-Trump paramilitary leader in Texas and Republican stronghold states. He could return to this corner of Montana where almost nobody, even inside the Patriot movement, likes him because of having to deal with him personally in the past, or stay in Texas where people like him and he can grift money.
And you told us last summer that Stuart Rhodes was so toxic that he burned his bridges with every single survivalist and prepper, people preparing, right, for the end days before Jan 6. He'd been replaced as leader of the Oath Keepers. But who knows, in the climate that we're in, if there will be renewed support. And we remember when former Oath Keeper spokesperson Jason Van Tattenhove told the Jan 6 U.S. House Select Committee that Stuart talked about making a deck of cards for Oath Keepers featuring people who had wronged him. And this is the same kind of set of cards that is used by the military denoting high-value targets. Did you ever see them?
No, Stuart talked a lot about different projects, often centering around murder or setting lethal booby traps that he never followed through on. The choke point of that is that Stuart is phenomenally lazy.
Look, Dakota, you have another concern. You're the oldest of 6 kids. You're worried about him renewing a claim of child custody.
My remaining minor siblings want nothing to do with him, so that would be a terrible waste of Stuart's time. Now, could he be a black cloud hanging over my family and making the attempt? That is possible.
Yeah. Are you scared?
I'm more worried about the state of the country than Stuart Rhodes. The slide into authoritarianism that I was raised to believe in looks more real now. The only difference being that Stuart Rhodes and the Oath Keepers, instead of being on the side of the resistance, have thrown in their lot with the enforcers.
Are you protecting yourself at all?
Yes, and I will not go into further details, but the one thing I'm not is I am not fleeing the country or leaving where I am, and people seem to be assuming that I'm in hiding somewhere, and I'm not.
Is it a statement you want to make?
Refusing to be intimidated is the clearest path forward, because quite frankly, I am done. For the rest of my life, I'm going to have an adrenaline spike if I hear heavy footsteps on a floor above me making the floorboards creak. I will always have a flinch response if another grown man starts yelling or throwing things around just because of my childhood, and I'm not going to follow those programmed in instincts, and I'm not going to start acting like Stuart is anything other than a sad, thuggish follower.
You told us there were thousands of people like you, young people who'd been brought up in these families. Have you talked to any of them?
Yes, I have been able to network with many wonderful people who grew up in the militia movement and in survivalist groups. My heart goes out to the families of all of the other January 6th insurrectionists who took the opportunity to file restraining orders against them, only to now have them loose on the streets. Well, the good thing about having a government that caters to people like Stuart is that they're also signing on for the enormous incompetence and pettiness that comes with people like Stuart. That is the thing to keep in mind, is that fascists are, on the whole, generally pretty stupid. Fundamentally, don't let yourselves be splintered. Don't let yourselves become browbeaten into remaining silent. Really develop connections in your community for if there is a natural disaster and FEMA has been dismantled, if there is an outbreak of a disease, you've got to focus on what you can do realistically in your own community instead of being caught up in things outside of your control on the national level.
Dakota, one last thing. I asked you when we spoke in August. This was your dad. We have pictures of you as a kid. Isn't there just an ember of that? And you said at that time that you had grieved that a long time ago. I'm assuming that's still true.
Yeah. Stuart is a petty, small-minded authoritarian, and anything that I tried to will into life for a real father-son relationship as a child was never there. Stuart has always been empty on the inside and always prepared to make that somebody else's problem. There's no feeling. There's just the knowledge that you're about to walk through tall grass with a rattlesnake in it, and precautions need to be taken. That is the sum of it. I have no father, and I haven't for a long time.
That interview was really profound, and what I really liked about it is Dakota Adams reminds me a little bit of my own elder children, like the ones who are adults, because they don't play with language. They're not trying to beat around the bush. And there are moments in this interview where he's like, my father is exceptionally lazy.
That's one of my favorite parts. Yes, Dakota.
Yeah. As I was rewatching it again and looking through articles and reading about him and his campaign to join the Montana legislature, I was struck with hope. I just was like, oh, we need to give the young people the keys. It's just time. We got to give them the keys because they are not messing around. And that is the energy that Dakota is running his campaign with. And so I don't want to jump too far ahead, but if you are listening to our podcast and you have friends in Montana, you should definitely send them this information, because I have a feeling that our dear friend Dakota is going to need some support in this conservative area of Montana. He is really trying to do the work, and I was very hopeful by that, because isn't that what we've been asking white people to do? We've been like, go to your people, talk to your people, move them, give them the information. Like, you have to get in there. You have to organize your people. And that's what he's doing. So I definitely feel like he could use some fellow allies to be behind him.
There's that scene where he is running for office and talking to that room full of folks. And I was so touched by his bravery. From the way it's filmed, you can't get a read on whether all of these like white folks, they have a very work on the farm white folks from Montana vibe is happening in the room.
I think the scene starts with banjo playing.
Sure. And they're like older.
I mean, you're not wrong. Yeah.
He's the only person under maybe 50 or 60 in the room.
Yeah.
And him just like bringing this vision. And, and he's got this kind of metal vibe to him. He's wearing like eyeliner. He's got like his nails painted black. He's got like a metal dude vibe to him. And he's just talking to these like salt of the earth older farmers about the importance and the organizing. And I was just like, oh, Dakota, yes.
Because you brought that, I'm just going to read this because I thought this was the sweetest quote. He's younger than us. He's not a baby. He's not a child. But I still was like, this is so sweet to me. It says he campaigns wearing a leather jacket, band t-shirts, and a skull ring that doubles as a bottle opener. A good icebreaker, he said. Adam has long hair and wears dark eye makeup and black fingernail polish. That may seem out of step with the conservative voters Adams is courting, but it's who he is. I have refused to tone any of this down since deciding to run for office, Adams said, gesturing at his clothing, because I spent so long as a child conforming to a little character to enhance my father's political ambitions and image that I refuse to do it ever again for any reason. Driving home the point, he said, I feel like being an honest weirdo is a lot better to a lot of people than being a spirit Halloween cowboy when you're asking for their vote.
I'm actually crying. I'm just like, very emotional. I'm like, Dakota's our future, man. Yes, Dakota, yes.
I still can't spirit Halloween cowboy. Now that's going to live rent free in my head.
The burns that he has for Stuart are just like, and because he delivers them like they're not burns, like he just delivers them like they're facts, right? He's just like, no, he's lazy. He's stupid. Spirit Halloween cowboy. I'm just saying facts.
Yeah. What would you like me to do? It's a true story. Narrated
wrong.
by me. Yeah, exactly. When I think about kids and autonomy and what it means to not give children autonomy and how long it takes to pull that back, especially when you're living in a situation like he was, it's so beautiful to me that he's like, no, this is who I am. I am going to do this thing, but I'm going to bring my full self because I understand the risk involved with disappearing and with people forcing you to disappear who you are to participate in something that is important. And I thought that was beautiful. So I think we should start at the beginning of Stuart Rhodes. There's so much to talk about, but Stuart Rhodes he's a mess. He really is. He starts out as a 18-year-old who is working at a dance studio. That's where he meets Tasha Adams, his wife. He worked there. He was 18. She was a student at 25. And for whatever reason, her dance teacher connected them. While Stuart was going to Yale and getting his degree, she was supporting him as an exotic dancer.
Of course she was. A thing that in my movements, like in queer and trans movements, sex workers are funding, and the labor and the work of sex workers is underwriting so much of our work. And so, of course, she is a dancer who then all of the labor of like supporting them is invisibilized because she's doing like stigmatized work as a dancer. Yeah, of course.
And of course, that's not something that we're talking about. It sort of reminds me of like Melania or like any of these women who have been elevated with conservative men. There's more sometimes to the story. And I thought it was interesting that that doesn't come up anywhere. I happened to find that in Wikipedia when I was just doing more rabbit hole diving on Stuart Rhodes. But he actually had gone into the Marines for a short period of time and was forced to leave because I know. Well, the first part, we're already laughing because of the second part. Okay. So bear with us.
Rude. I need to get my shit together. It's so rude. Okay. Continue.
Okay. So he had an injury. He broke his back doing a military thing. I don't remember what it was, but he hurt himself. But then he dropped his gun and shot his own eye out.
Which is just is like the basis for his fumbling through the whole thing. You know, like an example of like white men failing up. He is just the perfect example of a white man failing up over and over and over again. What I have to assume was irresponsible, and we see later, like lackadaisical gun ownership and gun safety practices. Stuart.
I think it's important to talk about this because he doesn't like people to know that that's how his eye got shot out. That's what his family said. So I feel like it's important to be able to say, hey, everyone, if you don't listen to anything, I need you to know that Stuart Rhodes, he shot his own eye out by dropping his gun. So we just need to make sure that people know it for no other reason that he doesn't want people to know. And so while he's at Yale, he writes a paper that talks a lot about our country's abandonment of the Constitution. And he decides that there needs to be a group that is committed to protecting the Constitution. In his mind, violations of rights that are happening, and he just feels adamant. And I guess this paper got a lot of attention. It was really well done. And maybe that's the last thing he did well, actually. It might, honestly, like in this story, this might be the only thing that I can point to and be like, this is a legitimate thing that he did that went well, that was based in fact, that other people who are academics appreciated. But I thought it was funny too that Tasha was like, what could go wrong? A group that just wants to protect the Constitution.
What could possibly go wrong? All those white men with guns.
And then she kind of laughs at herself. I know. And that's how the Oath Keepers start, is that they are allegedly trying to just protect the Constitution. And in their home, Stuart is elevating all of these white men out west who are essentially different militia leaders who have decided to take this up and fight the government. There's like a ranch And they've decided that they want to struggle with the government over land that doesn't belong to them, didn't belong to them to begin with. They're making these stands. When I was watching this with my son, Shannon, Isaiah, my eldest, he had me dying laughing because throughout this whole thing we're watching, he just starts yelling towards the end. He's like, what more do they want to be able to do? They can do everything. They're on horseback in the desert facing off with cops with guns.
Yeah, like these white dudes standing off against white dude cops, gun to gun. Then, there's a scene of, I think it's Stuart has his hand on his gun that's holstered at his waist. And the police officer is like, take your hand off your gun.
No, that was Mike Dunn.
Oh, that was Mike Dunn. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so exactly to this point that could you imagine anybody else coming with that level of firepower? When the Black Panthers did that, right? Like armed themselves, said we're going to protect themselves. It did not go like it is going for the Oath Keepers or that it has gone for these white, largely evangelical nationalists who can just stand off against the cops and later stand behind the president at his inauguration.
Yeah. Meanwhile, when you get pulled over and you have a license to conceal carry, you're like, if you want to see the gun that I have on my person, you go ahead and take it off me because I'm not even going to touch it. Meanwhile, we're over here doing everything we can to protect ourselves, but not be perceived as people who are willing to protect ourselves. It's a whole different world. And that's basically how we start the story. Ideally, it's only supposed to be about protecting the Constitution. Tasha and Stuart start having babies, and then slowly it starts to transition from something that feels innocuous and safe to something that is fueled by a paranoia that his family starts to become victim to, and that they start to have less and less understanding of as it goes on. But at first, Tasha, like many women in movement spaces, is writing all the content, is supporting Stuart, is organizing, is basically the secretary to the president of the Oath Keepers, if you want to imagine a role for her.
She's keeping all the lists of members and sending all the reminder emails and the labor that actually makes it happen, right? Because we know, like, Stuart's lazy and he has all these ideas, but if you can't actually get humans to show up in a place, all those ideas don't mean anything. And that her labor is what actually made the infrastructure and organization happen.
Which is funny because in the beginning, that's what she says about what she thought of him. She was like, if someone could just really love him, maybe he would meet his potential.
Baby.
I know. And I'm also like, maybe he needed... We didn't need him to reach his potential, actually. We actually needed him to kind of drift off into obscurity.
Simmer down.
That's what we really needed.
Not everybody's ideas are good ideas. Not all of them need organizations behind them.
And actually, let that be another talking point for our podcast. Listen, friends, ladies, gentlemen, gentle thems, everyone. If you are looking at someone and you're like, if I love them, they might reach their potential. Number one, maybe don't.
Go to an Al-Anon meeting.
Yes, literally. Number two, we might not want that potential. Okay, let's keep thinking. The potential that this person is about to bring might not be the potential we want walking around in the world, with your support, sending out the emails and writing the newsletter. No, thank you. But that's how it goes. And she says that no one really saw her as anything other than Stuart's wife. They didn't know that she was the one who was running things from behind the scenes. Many people didn't even know who she was. She was like an entity that was around with the children, had very little forward-facing recognition and no decision-making power. She's literally just working in service of this quote-unquote movement.
Right. And some of the evidence that you can see that she is maintaining the infrastructure is that to this day, she still has all the archives, right? So she still holds storage lockers that have all the pins and the sign-up sheets and the buttons and the stickers and the pamphlets. Stuart doesn't have that. He's not keeping the archive of Oath Keepers. She's just like, I guess I have this locker with all this stuff in that I'm just going to keep. That is the evidence that she is the keeper of the memories and the infrastructure.
There was an interview with her midwife because maybe not all, but several of their children were birthed in Montana under the care of a midwife, who said that as a family and as an individual, really, Tasha was not super open with the midwife, and that Stuart came to all of the appointments, and that the only thing that she ever expressed to the midwife's memory that was separate from Stuart and personal was like, I'm so sorry, we haven't paid our bill yet. We'll get it to you. But there was very little personal exchange, which is heartbreaking to think about when you're in an appointment with your midwife and there's not much emotional exchange. That's really hard to imagine, even, because being a person who has been pregnant and who's been through that process of working with someone while you're pregnant, not a midwife, but even my healthcare team, there's a lot of intimacy involved. And a lot of sharing that is just natural to that process. And that was really, in terms of evidence too, about decision making, about isolation, that felt really stark to me, that she was not able to fully, or the midwife felt that she wasn't fully engaging with Tasha as her midwife. Eventually, they're in this apartment and he's like, you know what? We're going to go to Montana and we are going to get basically more independent. He wanted more isolation. He wanted to be somewhere where they could actually strategize and plan.
And that they're entirely dependent on him, right? Where they are physically far away,
yes.
Where they are unresourced, where they are unconnected, where he has to be their whole world.
And where people can't see what they're doing.
Yep.
So they pull their kids out of school. The kids are all being homeschooled now. They are living in Montana, fully isolated on land. And the other idea behind this location is, can we run away? If FBI shows up, can we run away and get to people who are going to be helpful to us? And is it going to be easier to hide because we are in this wide expanse of land with other people who are more likely to protect us and house us if something goes wrong? And that's what they do. He fills their house with guns, which, I personally am not fully against guns and not against self-defense and not against even children understanding the safety and how to use a gun. There are a lot of reasons I think that maybe I don't have to describe to most people these days that we might want to think about protecting ourselves. That is not the issue of this conversation, or even the guns are not the focus. It's the way that Dakota Adams described it was apocalypse-driven anxiety. That they had spent their entire childhood thinking about and planning the apocalypse as if it was going to happen tomorrow. And I want to remind everybody that this was before January 20th, 2025. So this was before we had this kinds of concerns with our government that's going on right now, and our social security. And there's a lot of things right now that might make you feel like you have apocalypse driven anxiety. Yeah. This was a different context.
Yeah. And there's a scene where, as Stuart is starting to kind of degrade in his mental health and his capacities, that Dakota talks about that Stuart is barricading himself with survival gear inside their home, and that he's drunk all the time and he's just constantly rearranging their survival gear. And that the obsessive focus on that, and that really, instead of any other kind of education, the education that the children have is like a survivalist education. So practicing how to use knives and guns, they literally make a tunnel, like an escape tunnel that they hand dig out so that they can escape if the feds raid their compound, right? And that's the skills the kids walk away with.
Yeah. And to be clear, it's the children digging the tunnel, not they. The children are asked to dig the tunnel, and then they are asked to go through the tunnel multiple times to make sure that they know how to use the tunnel. I read that the children experienced a lot of medical neglect while they were in Montana, and they also were not literate. That Dakota actually learned his timetables when he was 19 so that he could take his high school equivalency exams, which is not hard to believe, because the children themselves are saying they spent all of their time prepping for disaster. That Sedona, the eldest daughter...
Can we talk about Sedona?
Yeah, we have to talk about Sedona. We have to. That's what Dakota says. She's the strongest of them all. And you get this image of her, and she's a slight redhead young woman standing in the forest, full hair. You could be watching some kind of warrior princess vibe movie when you first meet Sedona. That's the energy that they give. And that is because Sedona, at a certain point, chose to live in the woods rather than to live in her home, and used all the survival skills that her dad taught her, that Stuart taught her, to essentially leave the chaos of the home by living out in the woods by herself because she could not live in the house with him. He was erratic. He kept waking them up and forcing them to go through these drills. In Tasha's words, she disappeared.
And what a powerful indicator of how bad it is in the house that Sedona chooses to, in the middle of a Montana winter, build herself a hut, basically like a hollow in the ground, and live out there in the freezing cold instead of live in the house with Stuart. And to hear Tasha, her mother, talk about this and describe her survival strategy, her like literal not freeze to death strategy of getting hot stones and putting them in the fire. And I just was thinking about how bad it would have to be that mother and to watch your child sleep out in the freezing cold instead of in the house and think, yeah, that's probably a good plan. Good for her.
It reminds me too how nature is such an important piece of people's healing and how being able to escape into nature is not a gain when you're scared of your home. Like, it's like, oh, I got to be homeless, so I learned how to make ramen in a fancy way. You know what I mean? It's like not that.
Right.
And also when you're looking at her now as an adult, barefoot in the woods and talking to you about how she was listening for animals and stalking animals for miles and reading all the books and then practicing the skills on her own and finding a sense of safety and security in her own individual ability to take care of herself away from her family. It's like one of those things where it's like you're scared to call it beautiful.
It's resilient. She is a survivor in every sense of that word. She used the tools provided to her by her parents and she wrestled some agency from them, right? She was just like, okay, this is the tools that were offered to me. And then she figured out how to utilize those to survive and to be safe. And it is so resilient.
It's interesting to me too that essentially she's using his doctrine against him, Stuart, because she's like, I'm going to go out and do this thing. It has nothing to do with me wanting to be a survivalist. It has everything to do with me getting out of the house of this tyrant. And to him, he's like, she's using her skills. She's learning. So in his mind, he's ready to release her because he's like, that's cool. She can go practice her skills. That's amazing. He's feeling like he did something good. And so as things escalate, Stuart eventually, he decides that he wants to move the family to Alaska. But before we talk about that, I kind of want to stop and just take a minute to talk about how often during the film, I heard Stuart say something or I heard someone else say something that felt just shy of the truth, where I'd be like, I do agree that the Patriot Act and calling people terrorists.
I was about this, but I ranted to Sweet Danny while he was watching with me.
I'm like, I do agree that that is a violation of rights. I agree. And then all of a sudden, there's like a sharp left into white supremacy. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa.
This is the thing.
What is this thing where we're like so aligned? And then all of a sudden, you just got to, what happens?
This is how it happens to me sometimes with libertarianism, where they're like, we should be careful of a military coup. That is a real threat that we should watch out for. You can't trust the government. And I'm like, yeah. And then they're just like, and white supremacy is the answer. And I'm like, oh, I feel distressed by like how much I agree with some of the points, like the ways in which we overlap. Like we disagree on the solutions, right? But we have a weirdly overlapping agreement on the problem. And I did some self-reflection and noticing that.
You know, it kind of reminds me of my early TikTok days when I came across a creator that was talking about the Church of Satan and the tenets. Someone was reading them on TikTok and I was like, wait a minute, do I worship the devil?
We talked about that in our Satanic Panic episode. You were like, oh no, okay, yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, I could go to that church. I'm like a way better fit for the Church of Satan than I am white supremacist militia. Hopefully that doesn't surprise anybody. But as I was watching it, I was like, there are some of the concerns are definitely shared. The lack of privacy, the government overreach, the ability to make choices for your family without risk of losing your children or being policed in certain ways. The difference, though, is that the people who are most at risk for that are not in these militias. I think that's what my son was getting at when he's looking at them standing around with their guns. And he's like, what else could they possibly get that they're not getting right now? Like, what is it that they want? Is it boredom? Like, what do you need to be able to do beyond this? Similar to how Dakota Adams is breaking down the different ways that they think about different things, different, whether it's guns or racism or whatever, it does give me a moment of pause about where that line is when they're like bringing people in, right? Because extremism is spreading and it's spreading through these little internet channels. It's mostly targeting men, mostly young men in isolation. And so it did give me kind of a little more insight into where that switch happens, where it's like all of these things make sense and how they weave in this other piece that gives them a sense of power and ownership and community that starts to drag them over into this white supremacy militia world.
And most people are profoundly isolated and most people are profoundly lonely. And that is, it's the promise of cults. It's the promise of these kinds of indoctrinations, which is like, you will be included here. There is a place for you here. And that is such a powerful drive. And so if you attach that to all the other wacky stuff, people will do it. People will be like, okay, me too. I'm seen here. All right. Sounds good.
This is great. I like it here. I went to a conference that I mostly out of curiosity. I don't even know if I told you about this, but it was called the My Response to Hate Conference in Michigan. So it's Michigan. It was the Civil Rights Department that put it on. And they were doing a training on online extremism. And one of the things that did come out of that presentation that I thought was really important and meaningful was how often these folks are copycats and that they don't even bother really to write their own manifesto. It's like they copy and paste it and add a few lines themselves. They are mimicking the ways that the last mass shooter was dressed. There's this replication, and it does give that sense of like, I want to belong. I have not found a place. And so this is how I'm going to create belonging, is by over-identifying with other men who are doing this kind of shit. I thought it was interesting. It was not interesting in a good way, but I was just like, okay, that actually tracks. And when I watch how Stuart tries to make his children idolize these other militiamen and is constantly elevating them as heroes and things like that. Because when I'm sitting in that training, I'm thinking about online, because that's what we're seeing a lot. Stuart Rhodes also mentioned that when he was in isolation for 9 months, he thought of Nelson Mandela.
I know. What a mind fuck. This actually is the perfect example of why I want to talk about this and like why this was so important, because I'm still making sense of how to talk about it and how to have a sharp analysis about it, which is why a long form podcast is a great place to explore together. And so many people have done this better than I know how to do. But there is a there around misogyny, white supremacy, domestic violence, and the current authoritarianism not we have slid into, we are in this moment in the United States. They are so intimately connected, and anti-violence folks have been saying this forever, and here we are. Of course, it's run by a bunch of people who have been abusive to their partners, to families, to women, and that those things are inextricably linked, the ways in which they tell on themselves. And as we talked about in our Anatomy of Lies episode, and the people don't care, right? Those things are intimately connected and they're accusing us of the thing they're doing, right? One thing I did want to talk about, which feels directly related, is the young black man. I can't remember his name.
Oh, I have his name because I copied it and pasted it because I was like, what is this man's name? His name is Michael Whit Simmons, but they call him Whip.
Whip? Is that what they call it? Okay.
That's what they listen. I didn't make it up.
Yeah. Sure. He gets to decide what he wants to be called. So
that's right.
One thing I wanted to talk about is the scenes with Michael Whip Simmons, who is a young black man who was in the military and joins the Oath Keepers. And there is a scene where he is talking to his mother about his work with the Oath Keepers, and what did you think? I'm just like, I have lots of thoughts about that, but I was like, I thought that was such an important scene, especially connecting with what we were talking about around these ways in which his mother is like, yeah, don't trust the government, obviously. And how without community, without organizing all these things, if the oath keepers are who telling you, yeah, of course you shouldn't trust the government. Of course the things you've seen and experienced were not right. And there's like a degrading of the supports that you've had. And the oath keepers are who telling you that. Okay, great. Sounds like you're an oath keeper now.
One of the things that I've really struggled with in my local community is now there are a lot of Black and brown activists, organizers, community members that are engaged in my community, but not all of them are engaged in a way that's like, I would like to go to the range. I would like to think about doing mutual aid. I would like to think about becoming a street medic. There's an organizing that's happening for sure, but a lot of the organizing that's happening near me that I'm connected to, that I know about, is very much focused on the two-party system. We organize to make sure that Democrats get elected. We organize to build the base. We organize Black women to raise millions of dollars for Kamala Harris. These are things that are active, a part of like everyday political discourse. These are things that just happen. But when I was like, hey, I'm concerned about these things, or even just pulling my kids out of school and talking about unschooling, like, I don't often meet people along the path that are similar minded in that way, that are not also people who are white. Even in the unschooling community, if I do come across a family in my local community that is Black and homeschooling or unschooling, they're still a Christian family. And I'm like, oh, we made it so far. Let me get to that part. And so I can understand why. I don't know what his relationships are like. I don't know what his mother's organizing experiences are. But I also have to say that when she's like, I don't vote because nothing changes. I have never felt that so much more in my spirit than I did this last election. Even though I still chose to vote, I am still questioning whether I should have, even though obviously my little vote wouldn't have pushed it either way. I still feel some sense of like, what is this all worth if we can all sit here and agree that the system was set in place for the Democrats not to be able to respond to this moment? I'm struggling to figure out, like, okay, so then what is the purpose of this system if we have no recourse? Which is not true that we don't have any recourse. We see lawsuits are being filed, things are happening. So I can see, depending on your relationship to your community and the people who are organizing and how they're organizing, I definitely have a sense where I look at people organizing and I'm like, I love that you are going to go and protest and do a rally. I believe in protesting. I believe that we should be able to do that. And also, where is the tangible thing though? What is the thing that is going to directly help my family experience the next 4 years? That is what I'm interested in building. I want to know who is down for mutual aid. I want to know who are the people who are willing to provide medical care outside of the system. I want to know the attorneys that are going to help me look for loopholes. And I feel like that organizing within the political system is seen as an enemy versus a collective strength that will hold the base. Because if the base feels like Michael's mother, that democracy isn't serving them, then I don't understand how we blame people for not voting or for not being engaged when it's not meeting their tangible, practical, everyday needs. And when you now have 2 generations, and who knows what, I kind of have an idea what the generations back before that, but we have 2 generations in their family that are saying, I have never seen a tangible impact to voting. I have never seen something change in the ghetto, in the hood. Those are his words. Nothing has ever changed here based on how y'all have voted. So what do I look like voting every election? I understand that. And that's another place where there's alignment between the two sides, where it's like, if you could just remove the white supremacy, the patriarchy, the Christo-fascism, if we could just remove those pieces, we would actually have a lot in common, because the sense of neglect and abandonment by the government, by this two-party system, is not something that only one side is feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things in this larger story that I have been really sitting with. So when Stuart Rhodes was convicted for his conviction related to January 6th, one of the things that is not in the documentary, but is in other media that Tasha has done, is that she spoke at his sentencing hearing, right? So she talked about the violence that she had experienced at his hands, that the family had experienced as part of his sentencing. And one of the massive fears now is that he is free. He has said that he wants to hurt them. And she made a very strategic and purposeful choice to say, like, hiding wasn't going to save us anyway. So we might as well do our go of just telling our story and saying, here's what happened to us, and letting as many people know as possible. And I just think about the bravery of that. And then having an entire federal administration spit in your face and say there's no discernment about the impacts of the pardons of the 1,500 folks who were convicted related to January 6th. There was a hearing around Stuart Rhodes because there was a DC circuit court that was trying to keep him out of DC based on his previous conviction. And it was overturned, and it was said, it was a full commutation, meaning that he's not on parole. There is no state supervision. And again, I don't believe in state supervision, right? But there was some solace and there was some participation from Stuart's family in his sentencing under the premise that they would be safer personally if he was incarcerated. And then not only is he out with no state supervision, but he stood behind President Trump at a Las Vegas rally. And so he has the support of an entire federal administration. And I just think the horror of that is so intense, and the survival strategies they've had to build that they're now going to have to access, because truly we are the only ones keeping us safe. Like, there is no government coming to keep her safe, to keep the family safe. There's still minor children that they have together. And in their family court proceedings, Stuart has custody, partial custody over the children. It sounds like he is such a loser and asshole. Thank God that he doesn't sound like he's interested or trying to do any parenting of the minor children, but he has the legal right to do so. And how fucking horrifying for Tasha and that family.
There's a couple things that I want to talk about in relation to this. And one is that Stuart Rhodes and the other insurrectionists were apparently in solitary confinement. At the time of the filming where they shared a quote from him, it was 9 months of solitary confinement. And then he said that there were many other insurrectionists that actually spent 18 months in solitary confinement. Nobody left and came back better. That is also part of the anxiety. Like, it's clear with Stuart Rhodes that he's made these statements that he does not have any problems, at least imagining that he wants to hurt his family. Like, this is something that they should be concerned about. I would be curious about the other families that are impacted, because they're not as public. They're not necessarily the key narrator of a documentary. They're not well known. I imagine that this is potentially something that was happening before, that now people are returning back. And I'm worried for all of their safety, not just American citizens who run the risk of having these folks out in community, but these people are going back to their homes, and whoever they were hurting, harming, abusing, all of those things, this is not going to protect them any longer.
Right. Because it's not like the incarceration got anyone trauma therapy, care, stabilization, right? They just created conditions for folks to double down on their beliefs because they were persecuted, because no person should be in solitary confinement.
It's torture.
It is torture. Just because I disagree with somebody doesn't mean I want them to be tortured.
Right.
And that did not make conditions for his care, for him to account for the harm he's done, for him to have any changed behavior.
It didn't protect his family. His family is still at risk. These other families might be at risk. And now we also have cops that are scared, which, I'm not against cops being scared necessarily, but I do think when you have an elevated fear about something or a group of people, and you are a population of armed people who are already violent, I don't think that's necessarily a net gain. I think we've probably escalated some things that are not going to help any of us feel safer or be safer in the world. And the other thing that I really want to talk about is the kid meetings. When Stuart Rhodes decided and shared with his family that he was going to take them further into isolation, his plan was to take them to Alaska right before he ended up getting arrested. The kids decided that it was time to invite their mother into their kid meetings. And their kid meetings were meetings that they had already made plans to escape. The children had come together to design their own plans to escape their father, and they decided it was time to invite their mother into that conversation. When I heard that, Shannon, I mean, it broke, like I'm getting teary-eyed just thinking about it, but children are constantly being put into the position to have to save themselves. Sedona leaving the family and living in the woods is one example. These children spending time within their isolation to make plans to leave, to use the skills that they have, similar to their older sister, to figure out a pathway for their mom to leave. And then when they did all come together, they had this dark humor about it where they were like, it's the try not to die plan, is the plan that they were making. And she couldn't find an attorney to help her get a divorce because everyone was so scared of Stuart Rhodes. So the people within her network would not do it. She finally found someone. To my understanding, they plotted and planned for about 2 years. And when it came down to it and they were ready to leave, Tasha tells the story of having like a romantic dinner. I can't remember if she used the words romance. Did she?
She did. I think she used the word romantic because she was like, oh, we had a romantic dinner. And I clocked the term romantic.
Okay. I was like, I think so. And I thought about the times in my life that I have known women in my life specifically who have used a romantic dinner to soothe a man towards safety, or have used subterfuge in terms of like masking their true emotions to keep things cool and kosher. And we hear from Dakota Adams specifically that he would text Stuart and say, I am so proud of what you're doing, stay strong, and encourage him. So in Dakota's words, so that he would spend more time with his bros and feel like what he was doing was important and he wouldn't come home.
And that we were aligned and that there's not a problem, right? So it's like, oh, everything's fine. We're on your team as a de-escalation and giving him a like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good for you. And so brilliant and also so heartbreaking.
Yeah. 2 years. Can you imagine? 2 years of labor, of pretending, of enduring, of knowing that you can't leave yet because you don't have the situation fully fleshed out. You don't have the money saved. You don't have a place to go. So you have to tolerate the abuse and the escalation. Here we go. We're going all the way back to the beginning of the domestic violence and sexual violence organizations taking the pronouns off the website. If we don't have the resources we need to leave, we will have to stay in violence. Because the thing is, if you don't have a shelter, if you don't have relationship, if you don't have an attorney, if there's not a way to leave, and people imagine that like you just, you're a human, you just pick up your little body and you get in the car and you leave. And this man was able to isolate them to the point that they had nowhere else to go. And survival, as you mentioned, was tied to that. And when Tasha does leave, when they do leave the house and they have to do this whole thing.
There's like the young children are literally hiding in the truck bed. They're like waiting for him to like get drunk and pass out. It's the middle of the night. They are fleeing in hiding in the night.
And so they agree to take some stuff to the dump because he's up at 4:30 in the morning. Their plan was actually to get up and leave before dawn. And he starts doing his thing and he's yelling at everybody. And so they offer to take some stuff to the dump. Kids are hiding in the back of the truck. Right as they're leaving, he calls out to them again. And it's just asking them to get steaks on their way back. So she's like, yes, I will do that. And then she drives her family to the police station. And I wrote down this part because I thought, I needed to be able to read exactly her words when she says she got to the police department and her goal was to apply for a restraining order. That's what she had agreed to do with her attorney. And the police say to her, best bet, get back in your car, go back to your husband, pretend none of this ever happened. We're not equipped to handle this. And so she does not do that. She gets into her car and she goes to the next courthouse.
Which is like 2.5 hours away. She has to drive to go to the kind of big municipality courthouse.
She goes to that courthouse and she was turned away from that courthouse. And they were like, nope, can't help you here. So then she goes to the next courthouse. I don't even know which courthouse this is, how far away it is. And ultimately, her restraining order was denied. At the end of the day, they don't have the legal protection that they imagined after doing 2 years of planning and strategizing and saving money. The state abandons them and says, sorry, we're not equipped to deal with this. You're in the middle of a divorce. Go back, pretend nothing happens. So she does go home. And luckily, Stuart has left. He's not there. And they never see him again outside of the court and things like that. He never comes home. But they were so fearful that they end up setting up a rotation of security where they have somebody up with a shotgun in the living room, like children.
Like with a shotgun 24/7, like children. You know, it's like there's only one mom, right? And there's like older kids, but the kids are still pretty young.
Yeah, they're pretty young. I mean, I don't know how old Dakota is now, but they're not very old. They have to be in their mid-20s at the latest. Yeah. And so the amount of fear of escalation is clear. It is real. It is tangible. They are strategizing around it. And lucky for them, Stuart in his paranoia just up and leaves. And then eventually, pretty soon after, he gets arrested. But the fact that these people did so much work, they did the things, everything that people want survivors to do. She didn't ask for help from anybody until later. I know she ended up doing a crowdfunding for her divorce, which I fully support.
Good for her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
but like,
get your needs met.
She is secretive. They are planful. They do everything they can think to do to protect themselves. And then they go to the state and they say, hey, can we just get a restraining order? Can you just tell him that he has to stay away from us? We're not even asking for jail time.
Okay. The lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah. Which is like often escalates anyway, because then they serve the restraining order.
Because it's not even enforceable. It's just a piece of paper.
No, it's just a piece of paper. And although we love to have a piece of paper that some people are scared of, there are a lot of people who are not scared of that piece of paper.
Right. And Stuart seems like someone who would not be afraid of a piece of paper.
100%. And so now, because they chose to go through this strategy to try to save themselves, they don't even know if he's been served the divorce papers yet on their return back. They don't know anything about what's about to happen, but they don't really have a lot of choices about where they can go and what they can do. The way that law enforcement and policing put them at so much risk, turning them away multiple times. They didn't offer anything. To her storytelling, they're not even like, we can come and check it out. We can offer this. You can stay here. There's a shelter over here. Nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they even did like here's the state domestic violence program, give them a call. Again, even some of the things, my local police department, for all the critiques I have, they'll at least hand you a pamphlet that has all the DV programs on them. You know?
Right. And they were just like, good luck. Best bet. That's what they said. Best bet, go home to your husband.
Yeah, go home.
Pretend none of this ever happened. So when I see sexual and domestic violence programs immediately buckling, after having years of complaints from activists, from survivors that can see how their relationship to policing is not serving them, it just feels so painful because it is the snap of the fingers and all that work is gone. And it does leave a gap in a way that we're not able to cover. And I think that's the thing that's been bothering me too while we're having our rants. It's so interesting to me to watch people on social media right now be like, community is all we have. Community, we've got us. And I'm like, who the fuck is we? And who's us? Because I have never seen you in the mutual aid conversations I've been a part of. I have never seen you
exactly
talking about what are we going to do if the police fill in the blank. I have never seen you in those conversations. And so I'm not even sure you even actually know functionally what mutual aid is. What do you mean? What do you mean that we got each other? Because some of y'all can't even be trusted to watch your cousin's baby so she can go to work and do it safely.
Right. I think about when I was in the car accident and I had a concussion and I was just really struggling. And then I had like months of just really hard health. And so I had relied on a lot of my systems, right? And then I got a pelvic infection on Danny's birthday that landed me in the hospital with a 104-degree temperature as I'm like healing from a brain injury. And so, I'm tapped out at the bottom of the barrel, and I literally had to like call down 10 on the list, right, to have someone to come pick me up from the hospital and take me home and then sit with me because I was so sick I couldn't stand up to get a Gatorade. There were like 5 people. I mean, I was cared for and I had everything I needed, but we have each other, people on the internet. I'm like, great. Could you come bring me Gatorade when I'm in the hospital? Like, what does that actually mean? What infrastructure and care and time and energy have we put in place so that you could actually activate it? Because the theory is so nice. I do believe we only have each other. I do believe that is how we're going to survive. And you have to be able to like get your butt up and do the thing. You have to actually be able to like have somebody's phone number and have any practice to text them or be in any kind of relationship with them or know where they live so that you could come by and help them, or even, God forbid, know their favorite flavor of Gatorade so you could actually get something for them that was helpful, right? The gap is so far away from community care to having somebody show up and actually care for you. It's a wide gap, and I feel very aware of how wide that gap is.
This feels similar to the conversation we've also had about parenting pods and like how people without kids, I'm like, I want them, come over here, stand next to me. And then you're like, yeah, but I tried. And people are like, I don't know how to involve you. And there's like that middle space where it's like, how do we make it though? How do we make this connection between the two actually happen? The times that I have shown up for someone who clearly doesn't have anybody, one of the things I would caution people around, and something that I think about for myself a lot, is like, if you don't find yourself showing up with Gatorade very often, it is likely that you have not built those kinds of relationships. If no one trusts you to call you when they are sick, when they need help, when they need support, it is likely that you don't have a great practice of reciprocity. And so how do you become a person who is both practiced in giving and receiving that? Because some of that comes back to our inability to even ask for help. People will be out here suffering and not ask anybody for help either,
In that said time, I took myself to the hospital and didn't ask anybody and tell anybody.
No, you didn't. Shannon, you were just out.
Sure. Yeah. We have an agreement.
Okay, sure.
we had to make an agreement that you don't go to the hospital and not tell each other. So have it just to say, yes, Miranda Bailey, that episode of Grey's Anatomy, when she goes to the other hospital because she thinks she's having a heart attack and then like doesn't call her husband or tell anybody. And I was watching that. I was like, oh no. This is a hard mirror to look at. Shit. So just to say, I did go to the hospital and then like wait till I was in the ER to call Danny and be like, hey, babe, so I took an Uber. I couldn't drive. I took an Uber, and he was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Right? So like, just to be able to be like, yes, I am intimately aware with that asking for help is hard, even if you believe that it's valuable. The actual practice of being like, I need care is hard.
It's hard work. When I gave up my car and was like, how am I going to go without a car for a year? And I sent a text to my friends. It was so hard for me to send a text to my friends and be like, hey, listen, loves, I am giving up my car for financial reasons, and I am not going to be able to drive anywhere this year. So I'm probably going to need help with rides. If you want to hang out with me, you're going to have to pick me up. If I have an emergency, I will be calling you for rides. Just because I'm giving up my car doesn't mean I can afford to take Ubers all over the place.
Right,
so
exactly.
When that comes up, I'm going to ask for help. I don't even know why. Because like asking for a ride does feel, again, like a very small thing to be asking for, especially when I texted my friends and one of them, my friend Erica, was like, I didn't even know you drove because how often you're the passenger princess.
You've laid the conditions. You're like, okay. I mean, yes.
Yeah. I have friends who are like, every time we go out, I pick you up. So I don't know what you're even talking about.
I'm not sure what you're asking about. I just already pick you up every time. And you had a car in the first place. We already have this set up, actually.
Exactly. And I was like, oh, that's right. But even in those conditions, I was like, no one's going to want to pick me up. And I am like, because I don't have money or I can't buy a car right now. What is it? And I was like, no, it's fine. But I definitely have had to struggle with asking for help, being reliant on other people and trusting other people that they're going to show up. So it's complicated. And also, if we're going to claim that we got us, we need to have a very clear picture of at least who are the we and who is the us, because my sense is that we actually don't got us. We have ourselves and maybe one or two other people. And if that is going to be the case, we're going to be struggling more than what I think that little catchphrase is making us feel right now. Don't warm your hands on that one, boo. Like, don't. Let's keep thinking about how we're going to do that. The other thing that this documentary does bring about is the expansion of groups like this. They talk about another militia that is just another version of the Oath Keepers, but actually is going even harder. My favorite was when the leader, Mike Dunn, who it doesn't really matter what he believes or what he does, it's all terrible, but he challenges Alex Jones on InfoWars as if he's not doing enough. So if you can only imagine someone who's conservative, who's like Alex Jones, who said frogs make us gay, is not doing enough.
He's a pansy. He's not even doing hard enough. He's not going hard enough. You're like,
yeah, but that guy is actually now in Ukraine because he wanted to learn how to fight.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah, he just decided to go join a war.
So for that guy, Mike Dunn, is that his name?
Yeah, that's his name.
So for Mike Dunn, who goes to Ukraine to learn better about fighting authoritarianism functionally, I wonder how he feels about Trump cutting off support for Ukraine. Like, I'm genuinely curious about connecting the dots, because for me, a through line that my values align and you can see them through all of my actions and beliefs is so important. And the picking and choosing of literally going and fighting on the lines in Ukraine and then also backing Trump, who is removing support for Ukraine. I'm like, how do you make sense of all of that inside yourself?
Well, and it's a question that they have too. Dakota was bringing that up too. He's like, they know that Donald Trump does not know what he's doing. They don't trust him. They don't necessarily think he's an exceptional leader, but he does support them. And that's all they need. They just need the support, as you said, of the federal government. And now that they have it, he's going to remain their leader until he doesn't support them any longer. And so that is a choice that's been made.
I saw this post on Instagram that was guidance from organizers in South Korea who stopped the coup attempt from their president. And one of them was like, go after the henchmen. If the leader feels too powerful, go after whatever is the tier that's accessible to go after. Because when they run out of henchmen, or even just like this round of henchmen, it is one of the ways to actually get to the power. And I think about like, you know, who are the henchmen and who is gettable, who can be taken down.
Yes, let's talk about this, Shannon, because I have been thinking about this a lot, because I'm like, who is giving these fuckers gas?
Yeah.
Who is filling ISIS trucks? I know they probably have their own gas station. Don't get me wrong. I'm not delusional, but I'm also like, are these people coming home and being treated kindly in grocery stores?
Right.
Is their church doors still fucking open to them?
Right.
Are we still sitting at tables with them at committee meetings that are supposed to better the community? Because what I really need is for people who are in alignment with this administration to be treated like absolute garbage. I don't mean that we treat them inhumanely, but also fuck those guys. I literally have been dreaming. I don't know if I'm going to do this because I always have more ideas than I have time.
It's one of my favorite things about you.
Shannon doesn't know this at all. Shannon has no idea. This has never impacted her ever at all. But I had this imagination, like right as one of the executive orders went out about DEI, but most specifically the discrimination language around we don't discriminate based on, you know, all the things. I was like, how funny would it be for me to create a pop-up for my website that just said, I am no longer hiring white, cisgender, Christian, evangelical people. And, you know, like whatever, I would fill in some other stuff and then be like, click here if you have questions. And then it's just me like, see, motherfuckers, you see how it feels? You see, you like that? You like it? Because I actually mean it. I'm not hiring any of you fuckers. You know what I mean? I'm like, why are we not? And I know, I'm like, I have this tension where I'm like, I know if these laws were in place and they were actually kept to some form of fidelity, I would never be thinking in my mind, maybe I should just start discriminating against Christians. But that has not been happening. That has never happened. And I'm thinking about if we were actually serious about treating people as if they are an actual danger to society based on their behavior and their impact, I would argue there is no more dangerous people in the United States of America than white, Christian, evangelical, cisgender people. And in my opinion, they should be having a much harder time when they show up to your house talking about, can I do whatever the fuck? No, you can't. You can get the fuck out of my face. That's how we should be treating them. If Germans could treat Nazis and other them to push that ideology underground, that is what we should be doing. It should die on the vine, if for no other reason that when they come to the football game, no one talks to them.
Right.
That's it.
Because, well, the whole strategy is to test what we will tolerate.
Exactly.
And so if we start tolerating it, then they're winning. And being able to like, oh, this is intolerable. It's non-starter. We're not even talking about it because that's not even on the table. We're not even entertaining your absurd idea because it's a non-starter. I saw this TikTok that I did think was really interesting strategy-wise. So we're recording this in early February, and Elon Musk has just stormed into the Treasury and taken our data.
Oh, bitch ass. I hate his face too.
Fuck him. And he has like an army, I'm calling them like an army of teenagers. I haven't fact checked if they're actual teenagers, but young white men who he's using to kind of, do all the tech part of that. And one of those guys' dad owns some big business. And so she was just like, go post shit Google reviews, make sure no one does that. That business should be non-viable as long as any member of that family is participating in that. That is the thing. And I was just thinking about like, what does it take to say like, this is unacceptable? We're not entertaining it. Everything about it is a no, and we're not even entertaining as a possibility.
I think this is why I struggle with rules and laws as they stand right now, is because there aren't enough social consequences for a Republican who is using a slur in Congress. Why do we have Republicans? Why do we even acknowledge them as a legitimate party within our government right now? They are not a legitimate political party right now. They may have been 10 years ago, 12 years ago, but they are not in any way right now in alignment with the Constitution that we love so much. So like, why are we even like, let's have them at the table? No, I want their offices out of my city. I don't want any Republican leadership. Republican leadership is now the leadership of white supremacists, as far as I'm concerned. And when they want to turn that around, I would be very pleased.
At the inauguration, Elon Musk did the Nazi salute, the Sig Heil.
Correct.
Twice.
Correct.
I saw someone make this point just so crystal clear. I've met many people make this point so crystal clear, which is that if you are an international leader in the way that he's a national leader, for better or worse, you understand what the fuck you're doing. And if you don't want to be doing the Nazi salute and you did anything accidentally, then you would immediately make crystal clear for everybody in every single statement and every single recorded thing that was absolutely not true. And that's not what he did, right? He wants to play both sides. He'd be like, oh, just a Nazi salute. And then he wants people who feel emboldened by that to absolutely believe that he did the Sig Heil and that was on purpose. Like, where is the line, right? What are we doing?
Yeah, what are we doing? How are we like, oh yeah, Republicans? No. They have lost all credibility. If anything, we should have Democrats and a third party, Democrats and independents.
Right. The Democrats are the conservatives, and we do the next round of the moving to the
left. It's done. The right is now fallen off. It's like we've been dreaming about cutting Florida off and letting the panhandle just float away. Like people have talked. I know there are good people in Florida. I love you. Maybe go north.
Did you see, this is a total aside, but Doechii won the Grammy.
Yes.
Was it the best new artist? Mm-hmm. Or no, best rap album, because she was the third woman to win. Yeah. One of the interviews afterwards, she's saying a thing about Florida. She's like, listen, I know how you feel about Florida, but there's tons of talent and like Florida's my place. So Doechii and all of her people, we are not good.
That's right. See? Yes, they can stay. I mean, and also I believe that's where Zora Neale Hurston was from.
Sure.
There's some stuff that happened in Florida.
We can do nuances.
Listen, we can do nuance, but the point still stands that I think that's part of a lot of people's frustration with the Democratic Party, with American politics. There is a way that it has now legitimized white supremacy and invited it into our space. It has legitimized transphobia and invited it into our space. And the more that we continue to negotiate these things and hem and haw and be like, oh yeah, we could take it off the website. Oh yeah, we could do this. We can comply in advance. The more we do that, the more we legitimize that these fucking clowns are real and that what they think actually is truth and that it matters and that it's debatable. Most of what they're doing and what they're saying in our government right now is not true. Number one, most of it is we're not even certain how much of it is legal. And it certainly is not in alignment with technically what we say our values are. They can't be a political party. So that's my hot take for today. We are no longer acknowledging Republican leadership. They no longer exist to me. We don't talk about them. That's not true. I will be talking about them probably until they go away.
If they can dictate reality to me, I can dictate reality to them. And I'm just like, oh, yes, no, if you're telling me, oh, well, there's only two genders, I'm like, that's a lie. There's not. You're a liar. So I can dictate reality too.
Yeah. My reality is that Republicans don't fucking exist. How about that? So I'm not interested in talking to you about anything that you think or feel because it's fucking hateful. And I refuse to move halfway. Like, what the fuck do I look like? Walking halfway to dumb and hateful? No, thank you. I'm going to stay over here.
Good night.
Good night.
The end.
The end. But I mean, I think this is part of the thing too. One of the critiques I've heard a lot about Democrats, one that I also have given, is like that they're not doing enough, that they're too much about following the rules, so much so that nothing ever happens, right? They're always stalled by these small things that the other side is able to use against us because they're so united, right? Like the conservatives, they're able to create a base. They all agree. And I'm like, you know what though? I don't want to belong to a side that is empty-headed.
Right. Yeah.
I want to belong to a side that has critical and like that is thinking, that doesn't always agree.
Has discernment, has critical thinking that can engage. Yeah.
Individuality.
Yep, absolutely.
So we can all stand there and look like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg and just blink as these terrible things are being done and being said. Our disagreement with one another is not to our detriment. That is not the problem. The problem is white supremacy. The problem is that there are people who are okay with that level of power and control and lack of autonomy. And that is how they grab more power and take more autonomy. I don't want to be a part of that. And so while I have critiques for all kinds of things, I would much rather be on a side that is thinking, that it has complexity and nuance, and that is willing to be in a space where we're learning to embrace more people than be on a side that's more about being uniform and agreeing so that we can win, even if we're hurting our own self in the process.
Yeah. Well, as we end, I want to express deep gratitude to Dakota for offering us a model and just such groundedness and such clarity about how to fight authoritarianism. When I hear him, I hear experience and clarity of mission, of commitment, and of strategy. It's not theoretical. It is practical application of how you ground and how you orient and how you face authoritarianism. And I'm deeply grateful for the model. And I'm grateful to get to talk to you about it because it is just what I needed in the hellscape that is this week. And I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much for talking to me about all of this. I feel like Dakota gave me a lot of hope. There is just something really important in this time to see a young white man who participated actively in rescuing himself and his family from his father and is showing up to try to help rescue the rest of us. It's remarkable. And it does give me hope. And it's all that I would want. I just want men in particular, white men, to really do what they need to do to escape this doctrine and to support one another in getting safe and in protecting the rest of their community and the rest of us from something that is clearly starting to dismantle all of the ways that we care for one another, all of the ways that we understand who we are and how we belong. And we can't tolerate that any further. And we need people who are actively going to be engaged in doing that work. And Dakota is one of those people. Sedona, his family, and Tasha being brave enough to share their story publicly. I really hope that it, like many other stories, opens up what is possible for other survivors who are living their same experience and who are trying to escape.
To support Propaganda, please like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. It really makes a difference.